Sandra Birchmore, she was a 23-year-old young woman who had found out she was pregnant, 3 months pregnant at the time of her demise. But the story doesn't start there and it doesn't end there. It goes all the way back to the age of 12 when she first encountered officer Matthew Farwell, who was part of the Police Explorer program in the community. Normally a good, positive thing, except in this case, she was starting to get groomed at the age of 12, 15, having sex with Matthew Farwell, although the correct term would be statutory rape, and eventually getting pregnant with his child at age 23. And as the allegation goes, he wasn't too happy about that coming out, so her life was ended. Joining me to discuss, Shavaun Scott, psychotherapist and author. And this case goes beyond Matthew Farwell as well. There's so much to unpack here. Let's just kind of start at the beginning before we go into any of the specific details. What was your reaction to this story when you first started to hear the details?
It's just appalling. The idea that we have people in law enforcement who are grooming teenagers and even the allegations that are, we don't know if everything alleged here
Hmm.
is true, but the allegations that there were multiple officers involved, multiple people aware of what was going on. It's just a nightmare. I think it's something that in no civil society can we tolerate having predators and law enforcement. It's just despicable.
These are the ones we find out about.
Yeah.
And I say, I mean, I'm not, again, I'm not anti-police or anything like that, but I'm anti just bad people. And there
Yeah.
seems to be a lot of bad people. There seems to be a lot of bad people in the police, and there's sometimes good people that cover for bad people,
Yeah.
which in turn ends up making them a bad person as well. And
Yeah.
there's a lot of that in this case. I mean, there's a lot of elements of this case that kind of remind me of Ellen Greenberg a bit, where it's like, okay, let's have the ruling of this with a medical examiner be suicide. And it finally, years later, someone goes, that doesn't quite seem very right. And it's changed to suicide in this case. Luckily, the family didn't have to take it to the Supreme Court to get that done, which is still in process in the
Mhm.
other case. But eventually, they do change it to suicide, and things start going downhill very quick. Let's talk about that a little bit because in this case, we have this murder that takes place in February of 2021, just a month after what they're calling person number two, a friend of Sandra's that knows the story, knows the backstory of the abuse all the way down to the age of 15, and they're adults now. She's 23, but she knows the story, and she thinks there's going to be other people out there. These predators don't just they don't just have one and done usually,
Yeah.
and she wants to protect other people. So she on her own calls the police department, talks to the person that's named as person number five in these reports, who
Mhm.
works a police dispatcher at the police station, and tells them about the abuse, what happened there. And at this point, it's just allegations. But what happens with that information? It goes directly to Farwell. It doesn't go to HR. It doesn't go to a captain or somebody above to go, maybe we should take a look at this. Let's go tell Farwell directly. What is that? I mean, what kind of dynamic is that where that seems to be the right course of action? I'm sure this person didn't expect to get that phone call that day, or even knew that information possibly, but they knew and they felt the right thing to do is to take it directly to the person that is the proposed perpetrator.
Yeah. Systemic failure, absolute failure. Um, there's got to be policies and procedures in place when a report is made about an officer. And clearly, whatever was in place was not followed here. It's just abominable.
Is that because reports just don't get followed up on in some departments, period? Like, report all you want and nothing's going to ever change or nothing's ever going to happen. We see it in many departments around the country where you hear of allegations. And sometimes the allegations are damn well true, maybe very difficult to be proven, but they just still stay on. And damn well that back within the department, others must know the truth about this person, but they just continue on until something really gets pushed to the point of you can't deny it anymore. I mean, I know that happens in more than just the police department. It happens in the larger organizations and things of that
Mhm.
nature as well. But why is that where you have good people who are not involved in the circle of darkness, as we'll call it, but they get the information and they feel, well, I better just do this with it.
Yeah, when you have a closed system and that kind of a cohesive group, you've got to have outside accountability somehow. And I don't know enough, having not actually worked in a police
Mhm,
department, to know what the best way to have that outside accountability is. But I think that involves government, and we've got to be vocal about the
mhm.
need for, we've got to feel safe with law
Yeah.
enforcement, and we've got to demand that.
Do we need something? And we're speaking specifically about law enforcement right now, but I'm sure this could be applied outside of it in areas that are fairly corrupt. Um, eh, Catholic Church being one of them when
Yeah.
it comes to molesting kids. But this, just for the sake of this specific argument, and I'm sick to death of hearing this because I watched an interview this morning about it on Court TV, and it was just the typical, oh, bad apples. I'm sick of the bad apple. I'm sick of the
Yeah.
bad apple remark of, oh, it's just a bad. I think we're at a state here in some of these departments where you have, because it looks like this is going to go deeper than just him, where it's no, you have bad trees, you have a
Yeah.
bad orchard, and at
Yeah.
some point the orchard is just so infested with worms and grubs and crap, you have to tear the trees down because they're
Yeah.
never going to survive anymore. So this whole, oh, it's a bad apple, there's bad apples and everything. Yes, there are, but sometimes it's just so infested you have to tear the damn forest down. Now, it's not a way of saying let's not have police. I think that's idiotic, but there needs to be some
Yeah.
sort of systemic, let's plow this shit down and restart from the ground up, because this little plucking the bad apples out of the infested trees doesn't seem to be working very well.
Yeah, definitely. Agree with you completely. There's something dirty in the system when you
Mhm.
have multiple people involved in this kind of behavior, these kind of conspiracies, grooming of kids. There's a system that stinks, and we need complete accountability from them.
In the case here, in the murder of Sandra Birchmore, obviously Matthew Farwell is the main person with the allegations against him. He has the charges, but there have been allegations as well. As of right now, no other charges have been made. But I know the investigation is saying if the evidence leads there, there may be more in arrests. There is still isn't an active investigation. The other allegations go against William Farwell, his brother. And again, just allegations that there may have been an inappropriate relationship there as well. The allegations that we've heard involve texting, inappropriate pictures, and just language with a child. It could go further than that. We don't know. Again, all just allegations. Also, Richard Devine, another Stoughton police officer implicated in the grooming of Birchmore. I believe Richard was actually the head of the Explorer program, if I'm
Mm.
correct. So right there, I mean, you have like this trifecta of people in this thing, and you're bringing kids in actively. I guess I think a lot of us want to think when it comes to people who are grooming children and molesting children, they're acting alone. These three, if these allegations are true, kind of acting in a group setting,
Mhm.
kind of covering for one another, or I mean, it almost feels like they were passing her around.
Yeah, it
Um,
does.
how how often is that the case where you have one person that's abusing a person and it's like there's more than one involved and they're all kind of in on it?
Yeah, I don't know how to tell how often it happens, but it certainly does happen. And particularly in a situation where you've got a power imbalance, the military, a law enforcement group, where these people really do perceive themselves as at the top of the chain, that they
Mhm.
think they can get away with it. And then they sort of emboldened and empower each other in this kind of behavior. So we do know it happens. How often, I don't know, but we need to see that it stops. And there should just be the highest penalties for people who predate on
Well,
kids.
I mean, in
We
Florida,
just
yeah. I mean, I wish this happened in Florida because then they'd be up for the death penalty.
Yeah.
And I fully think that that is a good idea. Um, but a case like this, where you have this many people involved, this many people that people trust, and then you have the other ones. You have the person five, the dispatcher who informed Farwell. Um, how much clearing house do we need to do here on something like this? Because it seems, you know, you have one person, oh, this is the system, this is how it works. I may not have been the
Yeah.
one that did this, but this is the procedures that they go through. I mean, anyone who touched this or anyone who had awareness of this, Should all of them just be out? Maybe not charges against everyone if they just were aware but didn't do anything. I mean, to me, that feels like that needs to be the case. There needs to be like
Yeah.
really strict, hard-handed, uh, consequences, because this stuff just seems to continue on over and over in these departments that seem very corrupt. Notably, this is right next to Canton PD, where we know that
Mhm.
there's a lot of issues over there with Karen Reed. Two totally separate cases, but it does show a pattern of behavior, a pattern of the whole protect the blue thing, and
Mhm.
I just feel like that's just bullshit, and I'm sick of that term too. Protect the blue. What are we
Yeah.
protecting from? I mean, I get protect if they're like there's a wrongful accusation or someone's attacking them wrongfully in whatever situation there may be, but just to, like, everybody cover everything. It's called a cover up. But somehow
Yeah.
in this universe of police, it's like it's a real noble fucking thing.
Mhm. Yeah, everybody needs to go,
Yeah.
I understand there's a new police chief now,
Yeah. Now.
um, but I would be very curious if there's an oversight committee that is going over every person involved in the Police Explorer program. Well, I think they stopped it, right? They don't have
I
it anymore
believe, yeah.
there.
I think they
Yeah,
kinda
I
had to
think they
say
did, which is good.
Yeah,
Let the kids
yeah.
let the kids go to Boy Scouts or something. I mean, they can, stay out of this messy police department. It just sounds horrible. And I agree with you. Toughest penalties for people who engage in this kind of stuff, and for the people who let it go by,
Yeah.
who don't call it out.
And that seems to be, I think, a lot of it. I mean, there just seems to be so much of that. But I mean, again, we see it in other areas as well. It's not to take attention off of this, but we live, or we have lived in a very passive society where things have been, well, they're doing that. They're doing their thing. I don't want to mess up my job. I'm good over here. I'm not gonna raise the red flag, because then people feel, if you're the one that's raising the red flag, there can be sometimes retribution
Sure.
for that. There's laws against it, but
Sure.
it doesn't mean it doesn't happen if you're the whistleblower. But in things like this, why don't we have more of it? I mean, I know. I mean, just your opinion. Why do we keep seeing these sort of things in these systems where it is so protected, it is so almost secretive and behind the curtain, where so many people just keep covering up for bad behavior? Why hasn't this stopped by now?
Yeah, I like to think that with again, the power of the internet and shows like what you do, that more is being exposed. And it really makes me kind of sick to my stomach to think of how much in years past has happened that was never exposed,
Hmm.
never brought to light. And so I like to think that the more that you expose this kind of thing, the more we demand accountability, the more you get government oversight where things are monitored very strictly, that we're going to be seeing less and less of it. And certainly, the more these people come to justice, we need to do a better job at keeping these predators outside of any positions of authority or where they don't have accountability. So,
Do you think it ends up bringing more to the surface and more to the light, or does it just make them dig a hole deeper and go even further, and it's harder to discover them today?
well, I think the more that is exposed in this way, where you're going to see people tried, I think that you're going to find a different attitude in the organizations where people are really going to be, aware that there's accountability for their actions and for
Mhm.
the actions of their colleagues. I think that the more exposure we see, that ultimately it's going to be better.
One can only hope. One can only hope that one would learn by example and go, this happened
Not a
over here.
good, yeah.
But again, I mean, in the same argument, law enforcement, you have the death penalty, you have very strict penalties. It doesn't necessarily make somebody not want to go commit crimes. If you're going to
Yeah.
seemingly go commit these crimes, people still go and commit these crimes. What if we're to take a closer or a deeper dive into the mind of this Matthew Farwell character who started grooming somebody,
Mhm.
literally at the age of 12. Everybody's saying 15 because that's when they started having sex. That 12 to 14. I mean, there's even text messages between the two of them saying, I wish we would have done this sooner.
Mm.
And he's like, oh, I wish I would have known that. Uh, what the hell's wrong? I mean, what the hell happened to Farwell that
Yeah.
this is what's going on? Was he? I'm not trying to put any sort of like ease on him or like, oh, feel bad, but like, was he likely abused too, or does this just seem to happen sometimes where people are just that's their they're mentally stuck at the age of 12 where
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I remember being like 12, 13 when you're a kid, you're like, "Ooh, there's a pretty girl or there's a
Right.
handsome boy, whatever." But you grow up and you start looking at kids and they're fucking kids and you don't think
Yeah.
that anymore. Are some
Yeah.
people just like stunted for some reason at certain ages and they never go beyond whatever the fuck was going on in their mind at that age?
Yeah, it's layers of complexity with that. With pedophiles, that's being sexually attracted to prepubescent children.
Yeah.
And when you get into puberty, it's called hebephilia. So this guy was a predator, certainly a hebephiliac. He liked young girls. And what makes somebody like this? I don't know that we're ever going to have a good answer for that. Is it tied in with abuse in their history? Sometimes, but certainly not always.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes these aberrant patterns of behavior, they just came out wrong. And there's this real sense of power they get. And why does somebody feel like they need to overpower somebody who's so much younger than them? I mean, it's very dark, it's very twisted. I don't think we're ever going to have a really clean, clear explanation for why people go down that path. But just in size alone, this guy was 6'4", and the young woman was 4'10", I believe. It's like, there's just this power dynamic
Well,
that
yeah.
this guy really seemed to thrive on that,
Well,
and it's horrible.
and we've heard some of the transcripts of the texts as well, and I'm just going to paraphrase because they are very disturbing. And he's asking her when she's an adult while they're continuing this relationship. How old are you going to pretend you are tonight? Asking her to pretend she's like 14. Then he wants her to pretend she's 13. And then she wants her to pretend that he's her brother and that he's raping her. It's a
Mm,
rape fantasy as well. It
mm,
just gets like it's already depraved as
yeah,
hell, and then it goes to that.
yeah.
Like what? Why? I just
Yeah, you're right. And no normal, rational adult can even wrap their heads around how can this be appealing
yeah.
to someone. It is so twisted. And my guess is when you find this kind of paraphilia, the abnormal sexual desire, you don't usually just find one, you find a dozen or more,
Yeah.
strange, weird, kinky stuff that this guy was into. But it's sickening, nauseating, it's a tragedy, and that poor young woman, she was vulnerable, she wanted to be a police officer, and people that she cared about and trusted ended up doing this to her. It's just
I mean,
unbelievable.
the takeaway in something like this, I don't know what it is exactly. Then we know there's a lot of people out there like this that hide behind power.
Yeah,
Is it just something where it's not like this is new? I mean, these sort of things have happened before. I think they've been
yeah,
overlooked in a lot of ways. We're in a world now where we do call this stuff out. Thank God,
yeah,
but we've had programs like this where there's like one-on-one with kids, with adults for a long time. There's plenty of good-hearted adults that are just trying to help kids, grow and learn. But do we need to just not do that shit anymore and stop putting kids in those sort of situations? Maybe where it's always supervised. It's always has to be more than one person in the situation. It's not just, hey, let's go out, just you and me. Let's go in the patrol car. Let's go out for lunch, whatever the hell they do. I don't know. But
yeah.
should there just be a flat out rule today? Just because we have to, because you're not going to be able to see some of these people before they strike, where it's like, look, nobody's one on one with any kid, period. I don't care if it's police. I don't care if it's Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, Cub Scouts, whatever you name it. If there's a situation where it's a parental figure working with a child, teachers, um, just none of it. Like there's never to be a one on one moment anymore. Is that where we should just be in society, period, with children as a preventative?
Yeah, I support that. I mean, I think it's sad and tragic that we have to live this way. But I've also had the feeling, in law enforcement kinds of cultures, the more women we can integrate
Hmm.
into these places, the better,
Yeah,
and not that women are always perfect or morally,
sure.
above men. But I think when it comes to sex offenders, having more women integrated, you're going to have another set of eyes from somebody who's hopefully not a pedophile or a
Hmm.
hebephile there.
Yeah.
And I think, yes, the less individuals with kids is probably a much safer, better way to go. I know when I see kids in my therapy practice, it was always my way of doing it when they were young, with young kids, let's say under 15, 14. I would leave the door to my office cracked open.
Hmm.
Now we'd speak quietly because kids deserve privacy and all of
Sure.
that. But I worked a lot with molested kids, and it's just this sense of safety, and
Hmm.
there are other people right there in the waiting room, and the door is cracked open so you don't ever feel like you're trapped in here alone with an adult, you
Hmm.
know. And I'm a female therapist, so I think
Sure.
I'm pretty low risk in that way. But it's
Yeah.
just always this sense of kids need to feel safe.
Hmm.
And, alone, certainly in a police car or another environment with a cop, male cop, female child, and it doesn't matter. It could have been a male child
Yeah.
too, but it just seems like a setup for trouble when you get a predator in the mix there.
Well, I mean, I feel like it protects both parties. Honestly, it protects both
Yes.
parties from someone who could
Yes.
make a false claim and ruin someone's life, because that does happen. And it protects a child from someone who appears to be safe and is not.
Exactly.
It's a shame that we're in a world where this is uh, where we're at. But again, I don't know that it's something that's where we're at. It's just I think we've always been here. We just haven't always been paying enough attention. And
Yeah,
people have been getting
yeah.
away with it for far longer than we're
Far
aware
too
of.
long. And it just brought a memory to mind. I have a much older half brother. He's now dead, but he was molested by a pastor as a little boy. And at the time, this was long before my birth. He's about 20 years older than me, but at the time, he did let my mother know.
Mhm.
And guess how they handled it? He
Oh,
just didn't go
let's
back to
just
church. He didn't
yep.
have to go back to church, but
Mhm.
there was no report made,
Yeah,
nothing happened, and then the family never talked about it. I only
yeah,
found out about it, not that many years ago, that he had confided in his wife about this happening.
yeah,
Parents knew, parents did nothing, and so, yeah, this behavior has been with us always,
yeah,
but we can do better.
yeah, without a doubt. Hey, thanks for checking out the video. Be sure to follow us wherever you download podcasts, and especially Apple Podcasts, where you can get advanced episode and premium content on our premium channel right there. Also, be sure to follow us on social media so you don't miss any breaking updates on the stories that matter to you most. We're on TikTok, X, Instagram, Facebook. Just search Hidden Killers Podcast with Tony Brueski, and you'll find us right there. Again, thanks for watching.